Welcome to Applied Systems Thinking 2. What you're looking at is the map that we developed during the previous session. And Larry, if you have comments, go ahead and type them in the chat window, and I'll try and catch them. It's usually a little bit difficult for me to focus two directions at once, but I'll give it a try. Hello, Harry. Thanks for joining us, and Damon. So,
good afternoon.
If I'd like to start with anyone who has some thoughts from last week, or has spent some time looking at the model before we actually started the session, and has some general thoughts that they'd like to offer.
I did.
Yeah. Yes. Bachara actually went and added. No, that's Rajendra.
No. I didn't add any comment.
Okay. Well,
I tried to find something, but I really for 15 minutes. Yeah, I couldn't find really something substantial to add to it. That's why I'm here.
Oh, okay.
To learn. So
okay.
Yes.
Okay. John? What I was going to say was just, I don't know, a few minutes before was time to start the session, Rajendra offered some thoughts in here. He went in and posted in the general feedback issue thread about some thoughts about mental models. And after I read it, it looked good. And so I simply copied it and stuck it into the mental models element. And the idea is that as people offer thoughts about different elements or connections that are part of the map, we go ahead and integrate the meaningful things back into the map. And he also had a question about potential unintended consequences, which we were going to investigate, though he was here and he left, and maybe he'll be back. We'll see. So, John, did you have any thoughts from last week?
Not from last week, but I just looked over his mental models, and that goes lockstep with what I was saying from Seth Godin. Because people are just not examining the potential in the future as a challenge to their deeply held assumptions, their mental models.
They're a victim of their own current beliefs?
Yes.
Okay. Which I've experienced on an ongoing basis, and I am also probably guilty and don't even realize it. I mean, one of our greatest gifts, I think, is our ability to convince ourselves of anything, regardless of how ridiculous it might be. Though, if you want to get sort of jolted out of your comfort zone, find a way to ask some real true friends that are willing to tell you about yourself, about the things that they see you do that don't make any sense. And then don't argue with them, because that would be stupid. So I get off on a tangent. So and this was Janine, who really wanted to be here, sent me this note right after the call last week. She sent me an image and a bunch of elements, so that's there to look at. She said she saw 4 major groupings, the actual, the model we're building, what each of us brings, and how we're defining and framing the model. And she built this structure that I thought it was important to capture. I don't think it goes right here as a note from Janine, but we'll figure out where it goes and put it there. So are there any questions about what's there at the moment?
If we want to place, let's say, we have a situation and we want, most probably because we are analyzing it, we want it to perform or to go for a certain path, or what our goals seek in this situation, no? Where we should put it?
Well, we have goals or outcomes up here,
Yes.
which is, in other words, being that we realize this situation that we need to deal with, and there is a desired alternative to that situation, which we put in the goals and objectives, which needs a further description, but it is that difference or the gap between the two of those that provides sort of an impetus to develop an understanding. Okay.
Okay.
One question that I had is, we built this from saying the situation is the result of a pattern of behavior, which is the result of a model, which is a result of mental models. And that's the way that it evolves, though we need an awareness or an understanding that you start here and you work backwards to understand that foundation of this. And sometimes when I look at it, I get confused and think that the arrows should go in the other direction. Does anyone else have that problem? Okay. So once we develop the model, what do we do with it? The model, the model and the model and that we derive from knowledge of the processes and the stakeholders and the underlying mental models, and we develop this set of relationships that gives us a sense of why this pattern of behavior develops and is responsible for the situation that we want to do something with. What do we do with the model? Bichara, you read Donella Meadows' book on systems thinking?
Yes.
Do you remember when she talked about leverage points?
Yes. Try to find where are the leverages points.
Which is easier said than done.
Yes.
So that what we want to do is we actually want to find out what was that? One thing I should tell you is when we left the session last week, all of the connections were gray. And I didn't go through and change them all. There's a shortcut called Shift-C, which selects all of the connections on the map. Somebody's typing and it's, that's all right. It selects all of the connections on the map. So I just went and set the type of all of them to edge to the same so that it turned them all blue. It's part of the way that the definition of this environment was set up specifically by me for the models that I create. So the reason that the text is green and the connections are blue and you can have red connections is just a preference on my part. I have a template that I use whenever I create models because I'm extremely lazy I simply go to this template and I clone it and use that as a basis for creating new models, because the definitions of the connection types are all set up. The element types are all set up. The loop types are all set up. So I don't have to redefine them every time I create a model. So once the idea of identifying leverage points, and Meadows has a marvelous paper, which just happens to be called leverage points. And why don't I just go ahead and put it in the model? Leverage. Leverage points. Okay, so here, when you go look at this model in the future, there's a link to a paper by Donella Meadows called Leverage Points, which talks about a dozen different places to intervene in a system that come with, as you go from 12 to 1, they become more influential, though typically more difficult to implement. So it's appropriate to figure out, because the model is responsible, the interactions, the relationships in the model are responsible for the patterns of behavior. The way that once you figure out how to change the model, you actually build a new model. You build a new model which creates a new pattern of behavior. Which actually produces the goals and outcomes that you're looking for. Comments? Everybody went to sleep. Harry, might you offer us some thoughts since you're new here? Are we
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get associated with the group, and we're at a level that this is sort of introductory, and I'm trying to do two things at once here. So I'm sorry, I'm working with a number of screens.
Oh, okay.
What was your question, though? I'm sorry.
Well, the question was, based upon what I've just been rambling on about.
The leverage points?
Right.
So the way that I'm looking at this right now, and so once I have a model built and then I optimize that model, I would compare the current state to the optimized model, and then find out, you'd have to do a sequential test, which each of your variables, each of your stocks, or your points here, your activity points here, to see which might be effective to get as close as you could to optimization, because of course you're never really going to get that. But I mean, that's sort of how I would use my leverage points. Like, it's a leverage point if I can make a difference in a positive way to reach that optimal model. Does that make sense?
Okay. So you want, what is it? You want me to compare?
I want you to optimize my model. So I have numbers associated with each of these variables, right? I have an equation of the current state and what the ultimate state, and my optimization would be the optimal state, optimized. So those differences between those two, the current state of affairs for my model, let's say I'm doing food systems, because I'm doing that right now. So looking at the current state of affairs with the variables that I've identified within my model, which of course, as I dig deeper, there's going to be more and more of those variables within each of those variables. So it gets kind of crazy. But for a very basic system, if you wanted to just look at your production, let's just make it very basic here. Your agriculture production, your retailers, which would include restaurants, and then your grocery stores and your wholesalers, that sort of thing. So that'd be your system. And I believe the current state of affairs, how things are right now. I'd have an equation, a linear equation, or a curvilinear equation as to what my current state is. Then I would optimize that, and you can use MATLAB to do that. Once I have the optimal model, I want to reach that optimal model for my current state of affairs. How do I do that with these variables? And then my leverage points would only be those variables that I can change, right? I mean, where there's a change between current state and optimized state. So it really requires some experimentation with the variables. So if you have a whole bunch of them, it's going to be very difficult. But it's what I've found is sequencing makes a huge difference. So saying that I changed my production activities for peppers on one side because I wanted to reach my optimal model, because my optimal model says I should increase pepper production. Well, that's not necessarily, if I do that out of a proper sequence, it's not going to have the same effect. So it is a leverage point, but to optimize that leverage point, I have to look at my sequencing. So I really kind of have to test it. I'm sure there's some software out there that can tell me how to optimize that sequence, but right now I haven't learned it yet.
Okay.
So that's where I am with this right now. But I am doing food systems, and it's a pretty complex model because it has to do with, well, actually the old Jay Forrester urban dynamics model plays into this. So it's pretty involved, but it's fun. It's a blast doing it.
So are you actually building a simulation model?
I am working with some guys at MIT. I'll be at the conference and at the end of the month in Albuquerque, and hopefully
okay.
I'll have some one-on-one tutoring because I'm running into all kinds of stuff. But yeah, I'm doing some real experimentation here.
Okay. There are those people who believe if you don't build a simulation, you don't know squat. They're the purists. Some people believe that you can learn a lot developing a relationship model, and depending upon the level of understanding you're seeking, once you begin to ask when, how much, any kinds of questions that have values associated with them, the only way to get near that level of understanding is to build a simulation model. So I have seen numerous instances where people have got an enormous amount of mileage out of a relationship model, a causal loop diagram, that it took them an afternoon to build, and it would have taken them several months to build a simulation. And they didn't need to go that deep for the direction that they needed at the moment. So it depends upon the environment that you're trying to understand and what you're trying to get to. So Larry, I can understand the nature of the optimization that you're attempting to do, the reason for it. And from developing a relationship model, oftentimes you then migrate that into building a simulation model. I have lots of them where I have gone in that path. I personally find it quicker, easier, faster to build a relationship model because there are fewer constraints on the way that I structure it. When you build a simulation model, it's very well defined, and there's not a lot of options. I mean, you adhere to what you can do with stocks and flows and variables and converters.
I think the relationship models, I've used the relationship model to build the simulation model, and it's back and forth all the time. So it's sort of a learning process, and I'm in a university setting, so I have to do it this way. And if I'm putting together a proposal, this gives me pretty secure explanations for why I'm doing what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. That's where it comes in really handy. But without the relationship model, I don't think you have a good simulation model. So it's really, it's imperative. You have to have that. but I go back and forth between the two. So one leads to the other, actually.
It's a dance.
Exactly.
Yeah, I tell people that when you build simulation models, you define the structure based upon what you think you understand, and then you put all of the values and the formulas in it with all of your assumptions, and then you run the simulation, and typically it will tell you that either the structure is wrong or your assumptions are wrong because reality is not this bizarre. And you go round and round with it, and you, in the process of going around, you learn from the implications of what you told it to figure out how to refine what you need to tell it, so that it doesn't say that the end result is off the chart someplace. You know, when it actually goes out of sight in terms of growth, or it crashes to zero, there's probably something wrong with the model someplace, or the assumptions. Okay, so there was also a question about unintended consequences. I think it was potential unintended consequences from Rajendra.
Yeah, Gene. Hi.
Oh, you're back. Hi.
Yeah, I'm back. I got back my connection.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So yeah, I was I was there on this task force for smart cities for the government of India. So what I used to do was every time I'm putting together columns, one extra column I've started adding to whatever I do is unintended consequences, so that as I'm thinking about all the good things that go into the goals, I'm also thinking about the unintended consequences that may be building up, and at least somebody within the team is paying attention to that part of it as well. So I just wanted to ask everybody here what they feel about giving that a thought parallelly as we are trying to build systems.
Any thoughts about Rajendra's comment?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, what I was saying was, as we build systems, I thought, it would be always beneficial now that we know that, because we are probably practitioners of systems thinking, we are aware that unintended consequences are always going to go hand in hand with whatever good intentions with which we try to build systems. So I thought, we should always have one column, or in this case, one element which is capturing the unintended consequences. So we are thinking about it as we build the system itself, So
Yeah, I think that's as our model grows, those feedback loops, those balancing loops, or support loops automatically just occur as our model is growing, because our models are always growing, right? If I understand you correctly.
what I meant was, for example, if we took the case of IoT for smart cities, then there was this lot of rush to have sensors and all kinds of equipment all over the place, but the unintended consequence of that would be a city full of electronic stuff that you may have to throw out once in a while, and where would you dump it, and what would happen to all those billions of devices that would always need to be, let's say, replaced and so on. I'm just touching on one small thing there, but there could be so many others like that.
So based upon your comment, the thought that came to mind was that as I'm building the model or continuing to look at it and refine it, I think about where there might be potential unintended consequences, and how do I do things ahead of time to to avoid them. I know that people typically look at the system's archetypes as all negative situations. Anytime you find yourself dealing with a system's archetype, it's probably something you don't want. Mm-hmm. Though, if you look at the way the archetypes are wired together, and you know that you've created a reinforcing structure, I think the first thing you should do is not be completely happy and satisfied with what you've done. You should begin to look for the limits to growth that are going to arise and figure out how to mitigate them before they actually become problematic. So I think that in developing the structure of the model, it gives you a sense of things to look at and monitor on an ongoing basis so that you can deal with them before they become major problems. I mean, typically, go ahead.
Yes, I don't know if you, I watched one of the videos in which Linda Booth Sweeney, I think have you watched that one in which, she was talking about developing a systems map for the Yellowstone Park, where they reintroduced the wolves. Did any of you get a chance? Anyways, let me just tell you what happened there. So she thought, she had covered everything because there was a lot of, good stuff that she thought she had captured everything that needs to be captured in a systems map. And everything was going well, but then she started getting some hate mail from unexpected quarters from people around the Yellowstone National Park. So what she said was she had looked inside the frame, of all the things that had happened. I mean, that were happening well, and how the whole ecosystem was restored, and the rivers started flowing properly and things like that. But one thing they didn't realize was the reintroduction of the wolves was started giving problems to people around the Yellowstone National Park and so on. So there could be possibility that while we are looking into a frame, we may be so much hung up on the good things that are happening within that frame in which we are operating, but there could always be something outside of which we might miss. So I thought that was something a good systems thinker also had missed. So I was thinking, how can we, because as we move on, our systems are getting more and more complex, and it becomes very difficult if we do not keep an eye or a third eye on the unintended consequences. But I think it's too complex now. We probably cannot figure out uh, everything that might go wrong with our intentions. So I just wanted to ask you people how when you design your complex systems, how do you try to make sure that we don't create more problems than we are trying to solve. So
Any responses to Rajendra? Last week when we were developing this, we said that we couldn't just look at the situation. We also had to look at the broader context within which that situation existed. And I think that's what Rajendra was just talking about was, rather than simply think about Yellowstone Park, you have to think of what interacts with the park, so that in building the new model, you have to also consider that context. And it's the context. I don't know. Probably got to sort out do we mean something different between context and boundary? Well, the boundary is probably that invisible line that runs between the extent of that which is affected by the situation and that which is part of the context, so that you can actually look at how the interactions with the context. I mean, well, what Rajendra just said, you can change things when you create the new model inside of the boundary, and then you end up with conflicts with things outside the boundary that weren't conflicts previously because you've changed the situation. So the whole idea of, Musengi said, seldom can we ever do just one thing. You have to think about the implications of what it is that you're about to change and the implications of those implications, which is why it's not simply cause and effect. From the nature of this diagram, things are very interrelated. So I tied the context that we had on the map before back into new model.
Okay, here's a thought from IT system design.
Okay.
It's called use cases, where I guess we could call it a persona. The major players, the stakeholders in a system, and you get to a place of firming up a system design. Then you say, well, we think we've got it pretty good, but let's step through it from the point of view of a representative of each of the user groups. Is the design we're coming up with workable for everyone? From, okay, if we want high availability 7x24, can we do that? Do we have something that's maintainable? You know, can we force data entry out to, as Amazon has done with one-click ordering, can we force good data entry out to the user? And so in Yellowstone, we walk through this model as a wolf and as a moose, both. We do the predator-prey thing. Just a thought.
So it's a question of resilience, it sounds like.
Yes. Yes. So as we get farther along in systems development, have we really considered all the use cases and all the users? If we haven't, and somebody in agile development raises a red flag, stop. We're wasting our time to go any further here. Stop and really think this through.
Because when we don't, the typical result is unintended consequences which make the situation worse or create new problems that have to be solved by us or somebody else later. So I connected stakeholders back to new model. So after this session, if people would go here, which I will recommend to all the people on the distribution list, all you need is a Kumu username and password. You go to this project and you click here and you say comment, and you go ahead and add thoughts about this particular entity, and other people can look at it and we can begin to figure out whether or not those thoughts ought to be folded into the element itself or we do something else with it. That was what cancel this. That was what Bachara did, or Rajendra did before this session. And I thought the mental model description was really good, so I copied it and pasted it into mental models. I mean, when you develop relationship models, they don't come easy. Somewhere along the line, I realized that developing models and presenting them to other people just does not convey the realities associated with developing a relationship model. I got numerous comments from people on last week's session that they really enjoyed seeing the chaos in the midst of trying to create a meaningful set of relationships. What I have seen over the years is people just don't want to get started because they're afraid that they don't know how to do it. And because they don't get started, they never learn how to do it. I keep saying, it's like riding a bicycle. You got to get on it and fall off a few times and get some skinned knees and get back on it and just follow the lead of Nike and just do it. And don't worry about whether it's right or wrong. Just learn from doing, and over time it gets easier and better, but still chaotic. So I applaud the courageous nature of those of you who showed up.
I had a question on leverage points. There are 12 of them, and I think there needs to be probably a step, because we do not know which one of them is going to work best for us. So are we going to have an experimental or a series of parallel, like Dave Snowden calls it, safe to fail experiments of some kind? Because it may be too expensive to try each one of them, just like that. Because that is an important thing, right? The leverage point, and identifying that is going to need some. What does it need actually? Because it can't come simply from previous experience.
Right, and
that's where the sequencing is so important, and that's where the optimization, model optimization, can come in really handy if you're doing stock and flows.
But Harry, I think it may be difficult to model reality, right? Like, that's what I think. In the first, I wasn't there on the first one. I just heard the video. I mean, took a look at the video. So because reality is difficult to model as it is, the model, I don't know how it can converge to a good suggestion on which one of these leverage points. Because for a human it may be easy to understand that paradigm may be the most difficult thing to change, paradigm shift. But other than that, um,
But when we're designing an intervention for a project, say I'm writing a grant to get, in fact, I'm doing something like this right now. It's an intervention to get restaurants to start working together to buy from our local producers. So what intervention is going to stimulate that activity? These are our leverage points, right? That's what we're trying to address. And what do I think will work? Well, I have to be able to build a model and convey that in my proposal to the funders, and I have to do it clearly and convincingly if I'm going to get funded. And so far, so good. I mean, but I haven't implemented, so I could be totally wrong. There's going to be absolutely unintended consequences. I always know that. But that's how we progress. And being able to, my relative model is, the stronger my relative model is to reality, the more likely I am to get funded. If I have a history of those stronger models, I'm much more likely to get funded. And that's what I'm always shooting for. And that's why, and a lot of times the thing blows up in your face, but you got to keep trying. You got to figure this stuff out. I mean, that's what we are, right? We're always trying to improve.
Yeah, true. Yes.
so in terms of leverage points, at times, if you happen to run into an archetype, the reason that I love archetypes is they are well-defined structures that produce a distinctive pattern of behavior, and they also have well-defined strategies for dealing with them. And if you happen to run into an archetype in the midst of something, oftentimes you have a sense of how to deal with it. Oftentimes the model that you put together doesn't have an obvious archetype as part of it, and you have to do simulations to figure out where the leverage points are. Now, as Larry said, you can get a sense of them, though you have to admit to yourself that what you have deduced could be completely wrong, and be willing to operate from a perspective that you're going to have to do a reset if you find out that's true. I tell people that a model is a simplification of reality intended to promote understanding. And I mean, the only true model of reality is reality. Everything else is a simplification to some extent. And where we talked up here, we said level of relationships. We need to understand whether or not we want to, the level of abstraction that you want to build the model to. If I'm filling a bathtub in a house with water, I don't want a model that operates on molecules. They're different levels of abstraction or levels of detail for what it is that I'm dealing with. But you have to have a time frame that ensures that you don't miss any of the critical changes. See, if I go in the bathroom and turn on the water to fill the bathtub, and I leave, and I go get sidetracked in the kitchen doing something else, and the overflow protection in the bathtub is not working, and I go back in the bathroom 20 minutes later and find out that I've flooded the bathroom, it looks like an event because I didn't see the transition that happened. If I'd have been there and watched, there was a pattern of behavior that actually led up to the situation that I now have to figure out how to deal with. So you have to pay attention to the time frame that you're considering and the level of detail that's appropriate for what you're trying to understand, which is another one of those areas where you have trade-offs on and off, so that you put things in the model and you take things out of the model and you put them back. And my recommendation is, if you ever take anything out of the model, don't throw it away. Put a note on it as to why you took it out, because when you present it to somebody, they're going to say, why isn't this in there? And you then have this piece that you put in there and you took out, and you put a note on it as to why you took it out. And you may decide later to put it back in. I can't remember all the things I took out and why I took them out, which is why I saved them. Anything else we should add at this point?
Hello, Gene.
Yes?
Yeah, so Larry Paul here, Prescott, Arizona. One thing I think that should be included in any of these type models is the element of politics. You're looking at stakeholders. You have different groups within any organization that have vested interests. So take the Department of Defense, for instance. The Air Force, Army, Marines, everyone. They all have their own budgetary goals. The Marines were almost killed off after World War II. Luckily for them, they had Iwo Jima and they were able to live for another 1,000 years and things like that. The United States Air Force came into existence because the Army Air Force was basically disbanded. The Army didn't like that. So politics is human. It's a human scaled consideration, and it's everywhere within any kind of mental model that you have or the realities that you want to try to construct. So that's something that needs to be considered, and for that you go right back to Machiavelli. Okay, so That's my 2 cents there.
Did you see what I wrote? The different groups.
Oh yeah,
wrote it?
yeah, mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Anytime, and you can expect that there will be other people that have different perspectives. Even if they agree with you, they will want to take the credit. If you've ever been anywhere, they want the credit. So there's an old saying in business: "You've done a great job. We'll take over from here." And you're out. You're gone.
You can accomplish almost anything in an organization as long as you're not overly concerned with who gets credit for it.
That's basically it.
People that have.
And
Expect that there will be other people that have. I lost part of your statement. Expect that there will be other people that have
an agenda that is different than yours, or just want to get the credit for the actual idea that you have. So as Harry's going to make a presentation, somebody's sitting in the back of the room thinking, how can I torpedo this? How can I torpedo it? And then I get the funding. And that's a human reality.
The bitch, isn't it?
I've run into this plenty, so I absolutely agree.
And one last thing here. It's someone that I follow quite a bit is a fellow by the name of Colonel John Boyd. And I deal with athletics. I deal with adversarial decision-making, very rapid. So if you're watching like the Women's World Cup, those decisions are made in a split second. And there's in adversarial decision-making, there's us, there's them, and then there's the undecided. And just to go from what Harry's talking about with his making his proposals, you know pretty much who's on your side. You probably have a good idea who's not. Your problem is to sway the 60% that's undecided to your side. And that's, once again, that's a political situation. So how you go about it, that's the way you construct your argument.
Okay.
Okay.
So there is likely to be a ton of these perspectives that are appropriate, that I would encourage people to go to the model and drop them in various places so that we continue to evolve it. And so it gets to be a better guide to doing this, though someone asked me the other day, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember who, that wouldn't it be more advantageous at this point, in that we've gone through thoughts about how to apply systems thinking to a situation, wouldn't it be more beneficial for a group of people to actually apply systems thinking to a situation and go through these pieces? And my answer was yes. The question is, what thing do we want to look at from a systemic perspective? And my thought was that it would be probably beneficial to start with something relatively easy, if there is anything, other than something like world peace. Okay, I mean it's probably better not to doom yourself to failure before you start, I think. Any thoughts about that? Okay.
I'm game for food systems.
Huh? Say again?
I said I'm game for a simple food system.
That was going to be my suggestion exactly, since we all eat.
Okay. Well, Harry, can you show up on Thursday?
I have another Zoom meeting with my Penn State team until 11:30. Are we 12 o'clock on Thursday?
Yes.
Yeah, I can do it.
You down in the Keys?
What? What's that?
Are you down in Key West?
No, not anymore. I'm with Penn State. I'm not with the
Oh.
University of Florida anymore.
Oh, okay. All right. I looked at your LinkedIn page and said you're in Key West, and I was going to be jealous.
That should be changed to Penn State. Thanks for the heads up. I'll fix that.
Yeah, I was going to be jealous, but since you're up in snow country,
you wouldn't be jealous this time of year in Key West. Trust me, it's rough down there this time of year, unless you're a fisherman.
Oh, okay. All right. So, would you give us a sense of if we were going to do a relatively simple food system model, would you build a context for us to think about it between now and Thursday?
Yeah, so we're looking at it from an input perspective. You're going to be looking at soil health, need for fertilizer and water. What and seed, of course. So what are you appropriate for growing? So you're growing. So there's your production side, and then where does it go from there? So does it go to a wholesaler? So let's say food systems in terms of produce, because it's going to get really complex if we start doing meat. So let's just say produce. And then we're going to be looking at wholesalers and retailers. And retailers would include restaurants and grocery stores, right? And CSA, community-supported agriculture, that sort of thing. And then finally to the consumer and the desires of the consumer. So there's going to be that loop. So trends like kale for the last couple of years, which is fading away, and desired trends. So a lot of people think that like organic produce is consumed primarily by high income people, and that's not necessarily true. In fact, that's not true. What usually is the best indicator that we're finding is education level for organic, which and there's local food preferences, that sort of thing from the consumer perspective. So when you get to the consumer perspective, that's where things are going to get complicated because there's so many changes and so many different variations.
So if I tried to state the situation that we were trying to understand, how would I describe that in a few words? No, I have to put out an email inviting people to come to a session on Thursday. I have to give them a little sense of what to expect.
What constitutes a sustainable food system? What are our thoughts on what constitutes a sustainable food system? So we can delineate. So we could say for a rural community, and you could even say a town. So we could theoretically put some numbers to it, if you'd like. So what constitutes a sustainable food system? A sustainable community food system. Because there's a lot to this. Really, it can go pretty haywire.
Okay.
If we keep it small and rural, we can model it better.
Okay.
Let me put another word in there. Localized, a sustainable localized community food system. That will simplify it a little bit more from a modeling perspective.
Okay.
Wherever region you would like, because it matters. If I'm in the north, I can't grow year round.
Right? Okay. Other people have thoughts about that as a topic? Is it something you'd be interested in participating in?
Works great for me.
Bichara?
Yes, it's it's great for me, but unfortunately on Thursday I have a meeting at 12, so I will probably see the video.
Okay, all right. Well,
let me interject here. You won't hurt my feelings if you don't use food systems, but I will say that if I learn anything through this process, I'm going to carry it with me into what I'm doing.
Well, I would be fascinated by looking into it, and I think I know where there are some other people that would be quite interested.
Yeah, I would be
extension agent.
interested as well, but it's just that, maybe if not on Thursday, but if I take a look, then definitely I'll send some inputs.
Well, Thursday, it won't be finished on Thursday.
No, I mean,
I expect it will be several sessions.
yes.
Okay. Or would it be better if I skipped Thursday and waited till next Tuesday so that people had more of an advance notice as opposed to 2 days?
I think it would be, honestly.
Okay.
Sure help me put something together too.
Fine
Okay.
with me.
Okay. I'm flexible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think we're about done for today, unless somebody has an objection. And we need to continue to work on this, though in an asynchronous fashion. I told people that, well, several people that have been in the sessions I have had one-on-one sessions with, getting them up to speed with Kumu. If someone feels they're at a point where they would like to, I can actually give additional people access to modify the project itself as opposed to just add comments. So if you get to a point where you think you'd like to participate from that perspective, let me know and we'll do that. Okay.
Okay.
Right?
Well, thank you all.
Yeah.
And probably this afternoon or tomorrow morning, I'll put out a subscription notice for next Tuesday to do some investigation into what constitutes a sustainable localized food system for a rural community.
Great.
That get it, Harry?
That does it. That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all. And
Thank you.
I look forward to next week.
Okay. Thank you, Gene.
Thanks.
Bye.
Just a parting thought was, the local and sustainable seem to be contradictory. Just a thought.
Well, we'll investigate that. Be sure to bring that up.
Okay.
Bye.